Hello everybody, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy winter solstice everybody. I am sitting in my car right now and I'm about to go to see a spiritual teacher of mine give a talk tonight. And I have with me, you can see some flowers for the altar, beautiful kind of Christmas arrangement. One of the things I love about this time of year is the just the festivity, the feeling of all the lights. Like I'm sitting in this neighborhood right now, and I can't really show you. It's not going to be a good view, but there's just beautiful lights everywhere, and the poinsettias and the wreaths, and I love Christmas floral arrangements that people have at this time of year. And one of the things, not a lot of people know this, but one of the attributes of Venus in ancient astrology was that she was related to sanctuaries. And Venus was also related to religion, and religious experience and cleanliness go hand in hand, because if you've ever been to a beautiful church or a beautiful chapel or a beautiful temple of any kind, it's usually kept very clean. And it's usually adorned with all sorts of beautiful flowers. And that's one of the ways that we celebrate this time of year. Is it's so dark, but we choose to see the darkness of this time of year as a sacred experience. We try to create some communion with the darkness by adorning the darkness with lights that we place on the houses, and with the way that we decorate a Christmas tree. And again, almost every time of year, it's sacred. It's a sacred time because people are adorning things. People are making things beautiful and clean and nice, and that creates an intentional experience. We're intending to do something, or we're acknowledging something. And there's a lot of different things that people acknowledge at this time of year, but the sacredness of our journey around the sun, the return of the light that starts happening day by day at the winter solstice, all of these are things, of course, that we acknowledge at this time of year. And so another interesting connection, we're going to talk a little bit today about the meaning of the sun in Capricorn and the meaning of the winter solstice. But one of the cool things that made me think of this is that Saturn, which is the ruling planet of Capricorn, which is the sign that the sun has just entered, and it always enters at the winter solstice here in the northern hemisphere. Saturn's exaltation, meaning a place in the zodiac that Saturn is considered to be elevated to a kind of superior position, and sometimes it's said that you get some of the best sort of qualities out of a planet when it's in the sign of its exaltation. Well, Saturn's exaltation in Libra is the sign of Venus. And so it's a funny thing, because a lot of the times the language and the mood around Saturn in ancient astrology is sort of heavy, right? It's a little bit more like a watcher on the edge of the world. You think of like the Hermit Card in the tarot, or you think of the image of someone, a renunciate living in a cave, or you think of someone lonely or living by themselves. You think of Scrooge and his wintry office. You get that kind of feeling from Saturn, cold, distant, hard, like that. But Saturn is also one of the great, I read a quote not long ago when I was talking about Saturn in a series that I did on the nodes. Saturn is also a planet that is associated with melancholy. And melancholy is actually one of the temperaments most associated with artists and with mystics. And both mystics and artists oftentimes are said to contain almost an abundance of like pneuma, or sort of imaginative force. And you could even say that they suffer from it, that both mystics and astrologers and artists, because of a sort of excessive amount of imaginal sort of force and substance within, that they sometimes become morose. They sometimes feel as though we're carrying a heavy burden. I know many of you out there probably identify a little bit with this. So we feel as though we're carrying a burden that's difficult sometimes. And what I love so much about the fact that Saturn is exalted in the sign of Venus is that one of the greatest benefits of dealing with a little bit of Saturnine melancholy is the ability to find beauty in what otherwise might be judged to be just a dark or bleak space. So I think that one of the reasons people love Christmas so much, or New Year, or Hanukkah, or just the Yule tide, this moment of the year, is because it's a little defiant, right? It's a little bit like, you know what, it's dark, it's the darkest time, and we're going to adorn this with light and with beauty. And it's actually a fact of history that people who are artistic are often suffer, and people who are spiritual are often more acutely aware of suffering in themselves and in others. And yet it's that same proximity to suffering that generates some of the most beautiful poetry, the most beautiful hymns to God, the most beautiful celebratory traditions, the beauty of an altar or a temple, the way that we keep the deities in a sacred space. These kinds of things, the beauty of those things come hand in hand with a kind of stark, cold, wintry understanding of pain and suffering. This is why Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra, Venus's sign. So I thought I would mention that because sometimes it's a little counterintuitive. You think, oh, it's the return of the light. Really? Capricorn and Saturn sign? Doesn't seem like the most hopeful sign. But you have to remember that the darkness is the darkness is also, think about in plant life, the darkness beneath the soil, the deep dark space where the seed lies. That's the place where the entire that's where the blossom begins. That's where the like a yoga posture where you're stretching open, maybe from a forward fold, you lift all the way up and extend your arms upward. It's the same idea. You start from a more contracted space, and then you blossom outward and upward. So similarly, I've said a lot in the past week or so about kind of standing up for Saturn a little bit and being like, look, we need the dark. We need the dark and the light in this world where the opposites fluctuate. They're part and parcel of one another in spiritual life especially. So the winter solstice is a time, of course, where the light is returning. It's Saturn's sign in Capricorn. Saturn, exalted in the sign of Venus, has a close relationship, darkness and beauty. And of course, darkness, great light, it begins in our solar year, in the pit of darkness. And that's a spiritual metaphor for us. So that's, of course, a lot of people know this, but I thought, good to mention the piece about Saturn being exalted in Libra. There's something else that's really interesting, which sometimes escapes our conversations about Capricorn. This is not just a sign. Okay, so let's review some of the stereotypes first. Some of the stereotypes about Capricorn are that, Capricorn is shrewd, sort of ruthless, ladder climber. I'm going to ascend what are the known steps toward mastery or success in the world, and that's the path I'm going to take. And I'm going to cling to every rung on the ladder and, climb my way upward. Moon was in Capricorn not long ago, and I went and saw a documentary film with a friend of mine about rock climbing. And this, I'm going to forget his name, Alex Honnold, I think his name was. He climbs incredible mountains without any kind of rope. He climbs incredible mountains without any rope or assistance. And it's called free climbing or free solo climbing or something like that. And I kept thinking about Capricorn the whole way through, as the moon is in Capricorn, and it was such a perfect Capricornian image of the sort of there's something very bleak and hard about climbing a mountain, and something that you have to be very resourceful, very tough, very stoic. You can't flip out. One of the things that this climber was saying is that there's no room for fear in doing this, because if you get afraid, you'll fall, and if you fall, you die in this type of climbing. So Capricorn is kind of a good, it's a good image for Capricorn, the mountain goat that's scaling upward. Of course, that sort of shrewd, selfish, I'll do whatever I have to do to get what I want, is why we also sometimes associate Capricorn and the goat with the devil, right? The devil card in the tarot sometimes, like I'll do anything to get what I want. And this feeling of kind of being in bondage to your desires. A lot of people don't know this, but Capricorn is, like a horny goat, right? Or horny goat's weed, the medical herb. This is Capricorn can be an incredibly lusty sign. It can be a sign that is very, very passionate and very sensual and sexual and physical, specifically because it sometimes has a very complicated relationship with repression, desire, and I'll do anything I want, and almost like sometimes like being in bondage to one's desires. That's a Capricorn theme. That's also a Saturn theme, especially in an earth sign, which is more sensual. Aquarius isn't quite like that as much. So sometimes there's this theme of being sort of chained by one's desires and one's ambitions, and kind of being relentless in a not so good way. And that's where we also have some of the image of, like, the corporate greed, and I'll do whatever it takes to be successful, and this is sort of Machiavellian. And that's a little Capricorn as well. Now, those are some stereotypes about Capricorn. But you also have great athletes, record-breaking, pioneers in different industries, and people who, fly the highest and build the tallest building. And there's a lot of Capricorns who are very resourceful, and they don't quit. They're dogged, those are all sort of true, and that comes from, in a sense, the symbolism of the sun's turn at this time of year. The light is returning, but it's starting in a deep, dark place, so you have to ascend from it's a long way to ascend. And so Capricorns often develop very slowly. The journey of a Capricorn life is about time and effort and perseverance and things like that. However, there's a few things about Capricorn that often go unnoticed, or they kind of miss out. And this is what I wanted to talk about for sure tonight. One of them is that Capricorn was traditionally called the goat-horned, and then there's kind of a question mark. This is something that Robert Schmidt talks about in his work, and talked about in his work. God, I have to use the past tense. I'm not used to him being gone yet. So Schmidt talked about this in his work, and he mentioned how interesting it was that it was basically the name for Capricorn. We call it Capricorn now, but originally it was the goat-horned question mark. And it was just sort of an enigmatic name for a sign. And this is, if you know much about there's a lot of myths that go along that we could talk about with goats and things like that, but the constellation image is of a sea goat, and the bottom half is sort of a fish, right? It's like a sort of a fish's tail. And there's lots of stuff you can read that's very interesting. I'm not going to go into the sort of mythological take on the sign. One thing that I will say, though, and I think is really important to remember, is that Capricorn is a mythical creature, right? So for as real as we like to think about Capricorn, right? We're always saying, oh, Capricorn's such a realist. Such a, Capricorns are so no nonsense, they're practical, they're realists. Well, not really. Because there are elements of Capricorn that can be very ruthless and whatever, but you have to remember that what fuels a Capricorn is a vision. It's a vision that is born often in dreams and in what we might call the unconscious, or in places that we don't understand. Capricorns are often inspired by voices, visions, images, gods, dreams that are very mystical and that provide Capricorn with an impetus to climb and aspire. In other words, how does someone become so possessed? How does someone become so singular and possessed? We can say it's because of desires. It's just because of plain desires. But oftentimes we're not aware of our desires, of what our desires are. We're not aware of where they come from. And they come from a mysterious place. Oftentimes, for example, a plant, when it begins, there's a seed deep under the ground. But eventually, by the time the plant grows up and blossoms, the seed has vanished. The seed is no more. This is what we're getting at, in a sense, with this enigmatical, mythical creature with a fishy bottom and a practical, sort of resourceful, upward climbing, mountainous earth animal like a goat on the top. We're also talking about the way in which desires and the endeavors that we become so passionate about are often born in places that we don't understand or that we forget about. So, for example, when a person, when a person gets into things in their life, a lot of the times, when you're young, right, you get questions in a classroom. What are you going to be when you grow up? And a lot of times people they say, oh, I want to be this or I want to be that. But it's hardly ever how it actually works out, right? Very few people, when they're really little, say, I'm going to do this, and then that's just exactly what they do. So I've talked to, so many people as an astrologer, and when I ask people about what they do for a living or where they are in life, the most common thing when it comes to seeing how people have gotten to some place over decades, how has your life developed into this place over decades? The most common response that I get is, I don't know. It just sort of happened that way. One thing led to another. This is what we mean by the idea of the fishy origins. The long journey of life that starts in the darkness of the womb is a journey that we love to think that we're in control of, but really the shaping of our lives is so much a part of the seed of our fate that we are born with, the seed of destiny that we're born with. Its hand in our lives is largely invisible, and yet it's as though we are each born with an allotment. That's what they called it in ancient Greece, a portion. The individual portions of the zodiac called Moira, which is related to the word fate. A portion, an allotment. In India, there's sacred scriptures that say, you have like a quota that you're going to get certain things in your life, and you shouldn't strive to get more than fate is sort of naturally going to give you. And that's a value actually in Western philosophy, early Western astrology as well. Stoics had a very similar idea as well, that one should be, because one's life often plays out in ways that happen in spite of our plans, not because of them. We should be very careful about what we wish for. We should be very careful about what we strive for, because, there's the seed of our life that is going to bear fruit is something that largely we're witnesses to. We're kind of we're kind of like on an inner tube going down a river, and the currents are taking us in places. We have a little bit, with our hands, we're kind of paddling around a little bit, but we don't always understand where we're going and how it leads one place or another, right? On the other hand, how often, feeling some lack of trust in the inherent direction of our life, do we attempt to sort of hotwire our ride and try to like take over the steering wheel, and we get really desirous and really kind of intense, and we try to control the whole thing. That's also a big part of Capricorn and Saturn. Traditionally, Saturn is related not only to control issues, like the goat that just wants what it wants and it will go after it no matter what, just this kind of really annoying and persistent kind of selfishness. But it's also the fish part, the bottom, is also suggesting that there is surrender involved with the planet Saturn and the sign of Capricorn. So Saturn is not just about that kind of control, those control issues. Saturn is also, traditionally, in my opinion, the planet, I've said this before, closest to Neptune. How we now think of Neptune. Because Saturn is the planet that's farthest out, it is a planet that's also associated with surrender of the known, surrender of the visible. You're getting to the watcher on the threshold between worlds. And in that position, there is a great deal of surrender. Wise people, stoic people, are not deterministic. That determinism, like rampant sort of mechanistic, deterministic attitudes, are all about control. Stoicism, or people who believe deeply in fate, are usually people who are very trusting of the mysterious forces that guide and shape our life. They're not, in other words, a lot of people think that to be an ancient astrologer, to be someone who likes ancient astrology or something like that, which is often associated with Saturn and the traditional and all of that you have to be somehow a control freak, that everything has to be predictable and everything like that. Well, no, the basic idea of the basic idea of ancient astrology and the submission to fate is about the recognition of mystery and the way that our lives just turn out in ways that we can't, as if a current pushed us gently down the river and started shaping our course, and we only realize after long periods of time, do we start to detect that our lives are not ultimately ours. They're not ultimately just mine or in my control. And that's also a Saturnine kind of recognition, where you can't see the seed that bears the fruit. Eventually it disappears, it's gone. Similarly, when we're born, our lives just take shape, and we often lose track of how we got where we are. Why did we choose this, or why did we choose that? So life happens like that. And that's a Saturnine thing, and that's a Capricorn thing. And it's an ironic thing that at this time of year we tend to set resolutions. We set New Year's resolutions for ourselves. Why do we do that? Well, one of the reasons that we do it, in line with the Capricorn symbolism and the Saturnine symbolism that we're talking about, has to do with the fact that we don't like being out of control. And when we get deep down into the darkness, mystery comes in. And we say to ourselves, oh, how did I get here? It's this kind of feeling of exhaustion, or having reached the end of the road, or kind of like, well, here I am, kind of hit rock bottom. It's the darkest time of the year, or something like that. And then we say, I got to get back in control. I don't know how I ended up here. And so then, we set an intention, and off we go to climbing. Of course, a lot of people set spiritual intentions too. A spiritual intention might be a way of saying, I want to ask these larger forces to help guide me back to my center. And so intentions set at this time of year may also be about, wow, I've been trying to steer the ship all by myself, and I've been on a control mission, and how well has that been going for me? So, you know, this is a time of year where there's an ability to let go of a certain amount of control and surrender to the mystery of things, and to ask for the forces of fate, the forces of destiny, something larger than ourselves. If we've been struggling and battling with it, which we can do, which tends to run us into the ground, then we can ask for help in coming back to our center. So different reasons that we set intentions around this time of year. Some of them healthy, some of them not healthy, in the same way that sometimes Capricorn is really controlling. Other times Capricorn is, again, about trusting the river of fate and the mysterious way in which fate directs our path. So a lot of the times on the top, like the goat, we think, I'm heading somewhere, I'm in control. And on the bottom, there are currents, there are desires, there are motivations we don't understand. There's forces of fate working that we don't understand. So, those are a few things that I wanted to say about Capricorn. Remember, the goat-horned question mark. What is that question mark all about? Similar reason why we see a mythical animal. You want to remember that there are, like J.R.R. Tolkien, who is one of the most masterful fantasy writers in the world, arguably, in the history of the world, in terms of fictional novels and things like that. He was a Capricorn sun. This Capricorn often gets misunderstood as being practical, cold, hard, and real, when it's in fact deeply imaginative and sometimes very otherworldly and mysterious and dark. Dark isn't always a bad thing, though. Sometimes the darkness of rain clouds, the darkness of rain clouds coming in the summer, in the midst of a day. I've noticed that during the summertime, when the rain clouds come in suddenly and everything gets really dark, I get really excited. That's exactly the time where I want to go sit out on my porch and start meditating, start praying, start tuning in, because something's happening. Something's the status quo has been interrupted, and darkness plays that role in a positive way too. And that's also something that Saturn and Capricorn helps us with. Saturn and Capricorn together as a duo help us to remember that in order to return to some primal intimacy, with the divine, with one another, the habit and the routine have to be broken up. My spiritual teacher that I was listening to earlier today, he's in town for the weekend. He was talking about the need to recreate ourselves regularly. And this is the real meaning of the word recreation. And I just deeply appreciated what he was saying about that. And I thought, not a lot of people would think about Saturn and Capricorn, at least, kind of status quo astrology. We don't think about Saturn and Capricorn that says, recreate yourself, right? But one of the quickest ways to recreate ourselves is when uncertainty, when doubt, when loss of control, when darkness come into our lives, rather than seeing darkness, rather than feeling persecuted or oppressed, we suddenly see the question mark. The question mark that draws us in. Why is this here? What is this here for? If we can trust that everything is meaningful in life, then when darkness comes in, it's a reminder. You know what? Not being in control means I'm in relationship also with higher forces. That's pretty darn cool if you think about it. How interesting and how beautiful is it to live in a cosmos where we can literally be in relationship with higher powers? So I think that we have to remember that Saturn was the planet farthest out and closest to the sphere beyond even the heavenly sphere of the planets. In that sense, the darkness is not just not just something that we should feel pestered by because we like the light so much, but by something that also can bring us back into our hearts. It just takes a different route, so to speak. So I hope that this has been interesting for everybody. I'm going to go because the program is starting in just a few minutes here, and I'm probably starting to look to anybody who's looking out of their houses right now like a creeper, like some guy is sitting with a car full of flowers talking on his cell phone. Like, what is he going to do? So I'll get off my cell phone now. I hope you all have a very happy winter solstice, and it's full moon tomorrow, so I will be checking in probably with something written about the full moon. So I hope you all have a great evening tonight, and make sure that you set an intention, but be careful that your intention isn't sort of, an exercise, and don't become a control freak. Set an intention, but don't become a control freak. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.